UFC 318 goes down this weekend, and it's a pretty important main event. Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier marks Dustin Poirier's final fight in the UFC. One of the greatest fighters of all time to never win the ultimate prize says goodbye in his home state of Louisiana in front of a home crowd, in front of his family, against Max Holloway coming off of a brutal loss to Ilia Topuria. And this is a story 13 years in the making. To fully understand the scope of this fight, we go back to December of 2012, when a 20-year-old Max Holloway makes his debut in the UFC against Dustin Poirier. And the inexperienced Holloway gets submitted by Dustin Poirier in his very first UFC fight. But this would only motivate Max to become better and greater, and eventually win the belt, defend the belt 4 times, but meet a man named Alexander Volkanovski, who would take his greatness from Max. See, Max was making a name for himself as possibly the greatest featherweight of all time, defeating Jose Aldo twice, defending his belt 4 times. But when his path finally crossed with Alexander Volkanovski, he would taste defeat in a pretty certain fashion. But the best is blessed, so the UFC granted Max an instant rematch against Alexander Volkanovski. And although he had a better outing his second fight with Volk, he lost the second fight. Now being 0-2 against Volkanovski, he beat the brakes off of Calvin Kattar and Yair Rodriguez, earning himself a 3rd chance at Alexander the Great Volkanovski. But as fate would have it, he would lose this 3rd encounter as well, going 0-3 against the same opponent. Now let's jump back to April of 2019, when an opportunity presented itself to Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. The interim lightweight belt was put on the line. Dustin Poirier was given the chance, and Max Holloway stepped up to be Dustin Poirier's opponent and avenge his loss in 2012, 7 years later. But again, fate would not have it that way. Max Holloway would be bested by Dustin Poirier, a larger man. See, Dustin Poirier had been fighting at lightweight for a pretty long while to this point, whereas Max Holloway was making his debut at lightweight and took this fight short notice, so he did not have the proper time to bulk up and put the proper size onto his frame. When he did have the proper time to put that size on his frame, he fought Justin Gaethje last year, 2024, for the BMF belt, and he had an all-time performance at UFC 300, where in the final second of the fight, a 25-minute long war where he absolutely battered Justin Gaethje. He knocked Justin Gaethje out cold. For the first time in Gaethje's career, he fell face first into the canvas, lifeless. And Max Holloway was rewarded with this incredible performance by a title chance against Ilia Topuria. Ilia Topuria knocked out Max in that fight. Not only was it the first time that Max ever touched the canvas, it was the first time that Max was ever TKO'd, which brings us to this fight, Dustin Poirier's final fight. How poetic that Dustin Poirier in his last fight is fighting Max Holloway, who in his first fight in the UFC fought Dustin. These two gentlemen have been swirling around each other for 13 years. 13 years this fight is in the making. This fight is massive. Now for Dustin, it's a legacy thing. He wants to go out on a win in front of his home crowd in Louisiana. But with everything he's accomplished, with how decorated his career is and where he seems to be mentally, I think him losing to Max, especially if he goes out on his shield and gives Max an absolute war, I think Dustin will be able to sleep just fine at night. Whereas Max Holloway needs to absolutely, positively walk out of that octagon victorious this upcoming Saturday. And why is that? Because not only did he go 0-3 against Alexander Volkanovski, but if he loses his fight against Dustin Poirier, he'll be the first fighter in UFC history to go 0-3 against 2 separate opponents. A major blemish on a fighter's resume. Going 0-3 against the same guy 2 times. Now, of course, These two gentlemen are some of the best, especially Alexander Volkanovski, one of the GOATs of our sport. And Dustin Poirier, a legend. A certified, bona fide, badass legend. Always showed up to scrap. My favorite example of that is his fight against Dan Hooker, where he absolutely gave a war of all wars, beat the brakes off of Dan Hooker. And that's just who Dustin Poirier is. And I have no doubts that this fight will be incredible. It will be a war. But Max Holloway absolutely, positively needs to be victorious in this fight to sustain his career. Because where does he go from here if he does taste defeat yet again? If he does taste defeat for the third time to Dustin Poirier, after tasting 3 defeats to Alexander Volkanovski, does he go back down to featherweight and fight Alexander Volkanovski a 4th time? Will the UFC even entertain that? Will the fans even be interested in that? Will Max even want to do that? Does he stay at lightweight? And does he try to fight Ilia Topuria at lightweight? It's a very complicated situation for Max Holloway, and he absolutely needs to win this fight to ensure that he avoids one of the most insane blemishes I've ever seen on a resume, going 0-3 against 2 separate opponents. And he'll always be a legend, and real fight fans know that Max Holloway is one of the best to ever do it. But when people look back, they will see 0-3 against 2 separate opponents, and it will be a massive blow to the legacy of an absolute stud. And that's why Max Holloway, in the words of Renato Moicano, cannot afford to lose, brother. Cannot afford to lose. If you love MMA, if you love UFC, if you love combat sports, I guarantee you'll love my channel. Subscribe, leave me a comment. I would love to hear from anyone out there who also loves this beautiful sport. Drop me a like if you liked the video, and stay tuned. MMT out.